All right, do me a huge favor and listen carefully because from this point on, you'll never perceive silence the same way again. Now, most people, they live as though they are invisible to danger, that they're protected by the noise that they create in their daily lives. Okay, they smile and they nod and they fill their days with the hum of others, believing that very noise is a veil of protection for them. But Dostoevsky, he warned us that we are deceived because we're too loud to hear the truth. And the truth is that the world is listening. It's listening to your fears, your hungers, just waiting to exploit them. Just waiting. And silence, it terrifies you. So what do? You seek the crowd, the constant chatter, to drown out the deeper noise inside of you. What most people do not understand is that noise is not neutral. And it's not just sound either. It's a form of disclosure. Every single word you speak unnecessarily reveals something about you. It reveals your expectations to the world and your needs and your weaknesses. People think danger comes from obvious enemies, right? From visible conflict and confrontation, when in reality, while that may be true, what else is true is that danger, it comes from being predictable by broadcasting your inner state to the world, to a world that you have mistaken for rewarding that kind of thing. Well, guess what, buddy? The world doesn't always reward transparency. And you can find that out the hard way. But I do get it. I understand. Noise, it gives you the illusion of some form of control over your life, right? When you're participating and talking, it feels like you're involved in shaping events. But most of the time, that noise is doing the exact opposite. It's counterproductive. What it does is it places you inside systems already in motion. Conversations and norms and expectations that you did not design, choose, or consent to. You are not steering. You are signaling. And those signals are being interpreted constantly. The modern world teaches you at an early age, a very early age, that silence is awkward and it's antisocial. Silence is pathologized in a lot of ways. If you're quiet, something must be wrong with you. People assume something must be wrong with you, and that assumption alone, it tells you something. It tells you how deeply silence threatens the collective order. It threatens the collective order because it does two things. It breaks the feedback loop and it denies access. That is precisely why it feels dangerous to them. Because it makes you harder to read. Power doesn't come from the hurt. It never has. It forms somewhere quieter than that, away from agreement and constant reaction. It forms it in the kind of isolation where nothing is being affirmed back to you. And there's no one around to absorb the weight of your decisions. That's the kind of solitude that Carl Jung took seriously. He didn't see it as a form of exile or punishment, but as an invitation and a separation that forces a necessary confrontation, an internal confrontation. Because when the noise drops away, there's nothing left to perform for. You're left with yourself. not the version shaped by response, but whatever remains once that influence is gone. Something else happens when people cluster together and clot. Responsibility, it thins out, right? No one fully owns what's happening anymore. If something fails, well, it belongs to everyone and no one at the same time. And thinking, it dulls. It gets filed down. And what matters isn't whether something is true or not, but whether it passes, it fits into the collective mold, the pre-approved collective mold. And risk, it doesn't disappear either. It just gets outsourced. It gets passed along. This herd mentality of, well, someone else will say something, someone else will act, someone else will deal with it, take the consequences. That's how groups, they stay comfortable. And that comfort is useful to systems that want stability, because it creates these predictable patterns. And once behavior settles into these predictable patterns, it makes people easier to anticipate their movements and makes them easier to manage. And real power requires distance from that pull. And not necessarily psychological. Well, it does require a physical distance. It requires just enough separation to keep your reactions from being dictated by the emotional weather around you. I mean, that capacity, it doesn't develop in constant interaction. It develops where thought is allowed to run its course without any interruption. And that's what Carl Jung understood. When you're always surrounded by people and all of this noise, then you're constantly adjusting. And when you're constantly adjusting, you never truly find out which thoughts are actually yours. And what solitude does is it removes those reference points. Without constant reflection, the false versions, they fall apart. And that's the beginning of something. It's not that collapse. It's not failure. It's the beginning of something that is sturdy. But here's the part that most people, they miss about power. It doesn't need agreement. It doesn't even need opposition. But what it can't work with is someone who steps outside of that cycle entirely. Someone who doesn't react on cue and that doesn't take the bait. Whether people are cooperating or arguing, it doesn't matter. They're still engaging and they're still predictable. But silence, it breaks that loop. A man who withdraws from constant reaction stops feeding the system altogether. And that's why isolation gets framed in a negative light. That's why people tell you you need people, not to be, you don't be the lone wolf. You need other people. And yeah, I'm not saying that you forever need to reject being amongst people. That's not what I'm saying. There is a chapter in life where this invitation comes and you need to embrace it. But yes, this chapter, a lot of people, they shun it because truthfully, it produces someone who can't be pulled right or left. They're not easily swayed or swayed at all. But yeah, when you step into silence, the first thing that you notice, it isn't this download, these insights. It's discomfort. It is very uncomfortable. The absence of the noise, it feels wrong. Just because you were so used to it, something you were used to just leaning on, it's gone. I don't know. It's a sense of being placed somewhere in the world. Without that, without having that feeling of being placed somewhere, the mind, it starts to reach outward again. It starts looking for something familiar to grab onto, to cling onto, and when it can't find it, that's when doubt creeps in. You start wondering if whether you've made a mistake by pulling away at all. And Dostoevsky, he understood that stage. He wrote in Notes from Underground, the underground man, he doesn't retreat because he's calm or enlightened. He retreats because he can no longer tolerate the falseness of public life, the shallow certainty and the borrowed opinions. And isolation, it doesn't make him noble. It makes him bitter and self-aware and painfully honest about his contradictions. The silence doesn't comfort him. It strips him. It's ugly. It's messy. And in Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov, he withdraws for a different reason. He isn't avoiding society so much as hiding from what he has already done. His isolation, it becomes a pressure chamber. Every thought loops, every justification, it collapses under its own weight. Away from the crowd, his ideas, they don't strengthen, they decay. And in that decay, he's forced to see what those ideas were actually worth. Neither of them step away because isolation is safe. That's the through line. Isolation, it doesn't feel safe. They step away because staying embedded in society, it would have allowed the lie to continue uninterrupted. And silence, it takes away the escape routes. It fully removes the distractions, and what it does is it forces your mind to stay with its own reasoning just long enough for weaknesses to show themselves. That's what isolation does in Dostoevsky's world. It doesn't grant clarity right away. It exposes what you've been using to avoid it. But yeah, withdrawal feels like loss at first. Because most people, they only know who they are through response, through their interactions with others, through confirmation and approval. Just some sign that they are still registered by the world. And when that disappears, something inside, it pushes back. When that rug gets pulled, the body, it resists the quiet. And the mind reaches outward. It's searching for confirmation that it still has a place in this world. And then that's when the doubt creeps in. And you begin to feel detached from the flow of things. Slightly out of position, as if the world is continuing on without you, and you slipped off its edge. And this is where most people, they turn back. They get too afraid, and they don't press on. They don't follow the North Star. They turn back. They return to the noise. But they'll give it a kinder name. They'll just say that they needed the balance. They needed connection. That's what they'll call it. They tell themselves that they've been reasonable and social and well adjusted, but what they're really doing is relieving pressure way too early. They're stepping away from the discomfort before it's had time to do its work. The figures who withdrew didn't dress isolation up as something virtuous and noble. They did not enjoy it. They endured it. They stayed when it was unpleasant and nothing was being affirmed back to them. They allowed that discomfort to run its course. They remained long enough for the inner noise to burn itself out finally. And only after that did anything begin to take shape. When you cut the strings of social reaction, you collapse. But only to stand on your own finally. It is in this darkness, this crucible, that you strip away the illusions. You become the observer of your own mind. You do. You see fear as an old relic, and you see your emotion as a mechanism. And in that laboratory, you will craft this self that cannot be controlled. And yes, this collapse, it feels like loss because it removes roles that you once relied on. There is a loss there. All these roles you have just removed, whether that you're the agreeable one, the useful one, the misunderstood one, the caretaker, the performer, whatever your role was that you relied on, all of these identities, they all depend on an audience. Without one, they dissolve. And what remains is perception, pure perception. You begin to see how thoughts arise automatically, how certain emotions are influenced by specific cues. You see how much of your behavior was really just conditioned, and it wasn't something that you were choosing. And the fear, it stops feeling like this mystical thing. It becomes more mechanical. It's predictable and it's traceable. And once this happens, fear of losing fear just, it loses its authority over you. It can still exist, but it no longer commands your attention and your response. And the same is also true for guilt and for shame and approval seeking. They function only when they are unexamined. Isolation, it turns the mind into a controlled environment, into a Faraday cage of sorts. There's no external interference. There's no constant input happening. And this is where reassembly takes place. And in this final step, you will see your old self liquefy. Because this strategic solitude is not hiding. It is the chrysalis where you reassemble your character. You kill the need to be understood by other people, and you emerge as the man who cannot be bribed or broken. And guess what? The herd will despise you for it. They will despise you for it because guess what? Your independence, it shatters their dependence. Needing to be understood is a vulnerability because it invites negotiation and explanation. It's a compromise of inner truth for external acceptance. And when that dies, you stabilize and you no longer perform for others. You no longer argue for your perspective. You simply act from it. And this is deeply unsettling for people who live through consensus. They rely on shared narratives to feel secure. And your refusal to participate, it threatens that structure. That refusal, it reads as danger to certain systems built on reaction. And real quick, I've wrote a book on this. You can check it out if you'd like. It's down below in the video description. It's called Dark Mode Protocol. And if you want to go deeper than that, then I also do have a link where you can book a call with me. I do provide private calls. And if you just want to chat for a bit, I also do have a phone number. You can reach me directly. So those are all down in the video description below. Those will all be linked. So go check those out if you're interested. But in closing, here's the thing. Deeper than that, what I had previously said, in solitude, you rewire your mind. You remove the others and you remove the insecurity. And when the system collapses, you stand alone, unshaken, unbothered. And this is the dagger of truth. The man who embraces the dark becomes the only one who can truly see the light. When external reference points disappear, internal coherence becomes everything. You no longer calibrate yourself against trends or approval metrics. You move from internal structure instead of external pressure. When systems fail, as they always do, most people, they panic because their identity is embedded in those systems. But you don't panic. You already learned to stand without them. This is precisely why silence is feared and solitude is discouraged. Because the man who can exist without constant noise is very hard to control. And that is what makes him dangerous.